And let's talk about the Zimbardo Time Perspective Inventory. And more importantly, Dr. Zimbardo and how we can best use his technology, his methodologies. I have a new executive assistant. Her name's Danielle. Some of you have already bumped into her. Some of you already had interactions with her. She's lovely. I met her at a social event. Casually. I told the group, I was there to speak to the group, and I told them what I did and how I did what I did. And then she contacted me 3 days later, heavily traumatized, and said, we need to talk. So she did a traumatic breakthrough, and she's quite okay with me telling the story. She was on what's called, in Canada, disability and social assistance, called ODSP, Ontario Disability something, social program. Anyways, at home for 3 years at 38 years old. So she'd already been on disability for 3 years because of her trauma. So we cleared her trauma. She also had fibromyalgia, which she no longer has. And she also had this excruciating pain in her feet, which she no longer has. Whenever she gets stressed up, her pain would become excruciating. She couldn't move. Think about that as a metaphor. So when you get stressed out, your feet get so painful that your body can't move. You're stuck. Right? Anyways, long story short, she came to work for me, and I said, here's a challenge. I've been trying to get a hold of Dr. Phil Zimbardo. And I've been sending emails to Stanford and people he knows, and I can't get a hold of him. And she said, well, let me work on it, because she's quite a good researcher. She's got a real nose for it, and she's a good writer. She has a degree in writing. So anyways, not 3 days later, she came back and said, hey, Phil just emailed me. He's now Phil. He's not Dr. Zimbardo to her. Phil just emailed me, and he said he's really interested in meeting you. So that's how 2022 started for me, engaging in a conversation with no other than Phil Zimbardo himself, right? And that's where we are. And not only Phil Zimbardo, but the co-author of the book, The Time Cure, The New Psychology of Healing Trauma, Rosemary Sword. So I've had a Zoom call with Rosemary Sword and introduced her to PACE and how we use the Zimbardo Time Perspective Inventory. And you guys who are using PACE and using the ZTPI pre and post, they had never seen that happen before. They had never seen what we're doing happen before. They never saw somebody's ZTPI going from fucked, messed up to on the blue line before in 12 hours. Now Rosemary Sword and her husband Richard co-authored the book with Dr. Zimbardo. And they did that 35 years ago. And because they had heard about the ZTPI and time perspective and time perspective therapy, TPT, and they created a cognitive behavioral therapy based protocol, the irony of which it has 6 steps, just like PACE, but based on cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's ironic because so she shared it with me. I have their actual therapy on my desk. And where we diverge is they get into the story, the backstory. They dedicate quite a few hours to the backstory, having the person tell the stuff that really bothered them. And then, of course, using cognitive behavioral therapy, try to convince them that they shouldn't think that way, right? And so I shared that what we do, we don't get into content if I don't have to, right? So it was a great conversation. Now, I invited them here tonight. Maybe I'm a bad omen, but I don't think so. I think that's be a limiting belief. But she ruptured her, she's got to be in her late, she's about my age, I think. She's 66, 67, and she ruptured her appendix. So she's in the hospital, and Dr. Zimbardo himself has some health issues that he's challenged with right now. He's 88. He's 88. So I'm excited. I'm excited that we now have an open channel to him, and that I actually sent him from PACE. I sent him and Rosemary the module on the structure of PACE and how we use Zimbardo Time Perspective. I've sent him, with Danielle's permission, her PSSI 5. So that is the trauma assessment from Veterans Administration, as well as her ZTPI graph. And again, they hadn't seen that happen in 11 weeks previously. And I think that's a really interesting place to jump off tonight. And I think it's interesting because Dr. Zimbardo's work has been widely distributed around the planet. You can find European studies, if you choose, which actually reduced the ZTPI down to less than 20 questions, and then graphed their results against a full ZTPI and found a high correlation. There is numerous, I guess the word is are, there are numerous articles comparing the ZTPI for a depressed person and the profile of the graph to the Beck's anxiety and Beck's depression scales. There are numerous articles comparing it to the assessment for trauma called PCL, and it's PCL-M for military, or PCL-MC for civilian, or PCL-5 for the DSM-5 versions of it, and there's a high correlation between the ZTPI and those. So this one simple test that we have has a high correlation to a whole genre of psychological profiling. So when we do a ZTPI profile on somebody when we first meet them, and their past negative is really high and their past positive is low and their fatalism is wherever it is and their hedonism is low and their future is messed up, that's accurate to who they are. That is a very substantial graph. That is a very, very substantial graph. So I think the starting point here is for you to know that this correlates to a wide genre of other psychological profiling. So when you're dealing with a client, you literally have, quote unquote, a prestige tool in your hand from outside the Kool-Aid. All right. This isn't a Bandler tool. It's not a Grinder tool. It's not part of the pseudoscience of NLP. This is a tool from mainstream psychology. All right. So as coaches, if you're going to run an evidence-based coaching practice and you're using ZTPI pre and post, you're using a prestige tool from one of the Ivy League universities, Stanford, created by one of the leading psychological thinkers of our time, Phil Zimbardo, who was also the president of the American Psychological Association. All right. So for all those naysayers who call what we do pseudoscience and whatever they say, who cares what they say, but they say it, right? They say it. You say, well, yeah, cool. Say whatever you want about what I do. And to a psychologist and a social worker, I say, but show me the tool you use to confirm that your client got the results they came for. They don't have one. I'm going to guarantee you that 99.5% of all cognitive behavioral therapists do not test their clients pre and post. They do not. And when you talk to them honestly and openly, when I was on the road teaching for the Research and Recognition Organization, once they learned the NLP approach to dealing with trauma, and when I was teaching in the States, we used the term RTM, a full third of every audience would come and talk to me in a group, like in a standing group, and say, this is so amazing, because often when a lot of them were working with as CISM for first responders, critical incident management for first responders, they'd say, we do our counselors hour, the 50-minute hour, and send them away. But lots of times we didn't sleep that night because we didn't know where they would end up when they went home. And then with a tool like we have, the trauma model, where they actually get to 0 on a SUD scale, and then we use something like ZTPI to show that they're in a really balanced way, that's so powerful. So I think that first point, we can't stress it enough. And you can go online and read the things that are said about Dr. Zimbardo. Read the things that are said about him when he was at Stanford. Now, he's quite controversial. Don't get me wrong. I don't think I like anybody who's not controversial. If you're not controversial, you won't be my friend. Just let's put it that way. You better have an opinion that's a little outside the box about something. I don't care what it is. Maybe like 3-wheel cars. I think they're stupid, but at least, you have an opinion about something. Yeah, he's controversial, but was also the head of psychology at Stanford and the president of the American Psychological Association. The guy who came after him, Dr. Seligman, has nothing to say but good things about him. And I mentioned Seligman because Seligman is brilliant. You can watch his TED Talk, S-E-L-I-G, Selig, M-A-N, S-E-L-I-G-M-A-N, Seligman. CNN asked him at one conference to give them a soundbite on the state of psychology in America. And he asked what a soundbite was, and they said, well, a word. And he said, okay. So ask me the question. And they're recording, and they say, what's the state of psychological therapy in America? He said, good. And they said, cut. They said, that's not what you're saying publicly. He said, well, you told me I had a word. They said, okay, 2 words. So they ask him, so they run the cameras, they ask him again, what's the state of psychology in America? He said, not good. They go, cut. Well, you just said good, now you said not good. He said, well, you gave me 2 words. They said, okay, say whatever you want to say. And they asked Solomon, what's the state of psychology in America? He said, not good enough, right? So he is quintessentially, like he's controversial as well. And so you have a tool created by a really controversial guy. And, if you want to talk about some of his, that people can really resonate with, the Stanford Prison Experiment. The Stanford Prison Experiment is a great story to tell. I encourage you to research it. Literally, Dr. Zimbardo has been, up until just recently, very interested in how people get sucked into evil, how they get drawn into the evil thinking, evil behavior, evil. And so as a very young professor at Stanford, with his team, he ran the Stanford Prison Experiment, where he took over a gym and built a prison on a holiday weekend and recruited students to participate and randomly assign them tasks as guards or prisoners. Totally random. So prisoner, 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 guard, prisoner, prisoner, prisoner. But 24 gave them uniforms, prison uniforms, guard uniforms. Guards had truncheons and other things to be guards. Had rooms with locks, had 1 or 2 prisoners per room. About 24 or 30 hours into the exercise, things got crazy. Things got, as my British friends say, things went pear-shaped. They started getting violent. Guard on prisoner, prisoner on guard. Now, it was really interesting. And he's famous for 2 things, right? Because this study really, really started highlighting. There's some controversy now about some of the information. It is available. Thank you, Laura. That special's on Netflix. It's controversial because now they're questioning some of the findings, but the findings from that were some of the original illumination on how fast people can turn on other people, how fast people can be influenced to turn on other people. The second thing he's famous for is because he didn't stop the exercise. He didn't stop the experiment. He let it go. More people got hurt. He couldn't. He's such a curious researcher. He was fascinated by what was happening. And then his team, not him personally, but his team did the Marshmallow Experiment. Now, for most of my clients who have children, this is really, really important. The Marshmallow Experiment goes like this. You take a 6-year-old in a room, you put a plate in the middle of the table, and you put a marshmallow on it. You tell them, look, I've got to leave the room. If you want the marshmallow, you can eat it right away. No worries. However, if you wait till I come back, I'll give you 2. So you can have 2 marshmallows, right? And they have a camera in the room. The kids don't know they're being videotaped, and the researcher leaves the room for a prescribed amount of time. And they videotape these kids. Now, the kids are beautiful. Some of them just sit and look at the marshmallow and could care less. And some of the kids are devious little buggers, and they pick up the marshmallow and they carve out the bottom, eat it, and then put the marshmallow back down. And some of the kids are so torn between eating it and saving it that they actually get up and turn their back to the marshmallow, stand in the corner with their heads in the corner. Right? And then some of them just grab it and eat it. Done. Then these researchers followed these children for 20 years. So from 6 to 26. And there's a profound learning. Those children who sought immediate gratitude have the marshmallow now, had sex earlier than the other group, had unprotected sex earlier, were into booze and drugs earlier, drove recklessly. Most of them did not go to college or university. None of them went to grad school. The early gratification people did not fare well in life. The people who delayed their gratification, finished high school, finished college, finished their grad degrees, married, with a career, with a house in suburbia at 26 years old. And that orientation between present hedonism or future orientation started this inquiry into the time perspective. Into the time perspective. Right? So now we have a narrative to tell our clients about prestige. And a lot of what we do, Surinder's online tonight with us. So Surinder is probably the most advanced hypnotherapist of all of us here. To the best of my knowledge, I don't know what each of you do behind closed doors, but to my knowledge, he is. And I'm with my client for the first time. That's the first thing I do with my client is a ZTPI. And I tell them a story because when we're telling a story, we induce trance. Right? When you tell a story, you induce trance. And if you tell it in a way that's based on a Milton Erickson model, hey, I know you're wondering, and it's good to wonder because that means you're open to understanding what we're going to do in this session, right? There's the first 6 pieces of the Milton model gone. And what you need to know is you have a conscious mind and a conscious mind, and your unconscious mind's here and my unconscious mind's here, and you probably know more than you think you do you not? It's not for me to tell you one way or the other, but I am going to tell you, and then the run-on sentence about Phil Zimbardo, right? Throw in some phonological ambiguity, and I have the person in a light trance. And now I do the ZTPI. And I've upped my game beyond all the other coaches who don't have a tool from a prestige university, who are not going to guarantee the results and who are not going to measure the outcome. Why would you not measure the outcome? The only reason to not measure the outcome of your clients is because you're afraid. The only reason to not measure the outcome of your clients is because you're afraid. Give me another reason for not measuring the outcome of your clients. If I'm advertising in my field, I can overcome trauma. Surinder works with weight loss clients and smoking cessation and other things, anxiety. Why wouldn't we measure our clients' success? Now, smoking cessation is pretty easy. Either you smoke or you don't, right? Weight loss is a little more complex because they have to lose the weight and then measure and keep the weight off. But when you're using a tool, and you tell them I'm going to do this pre and post, and then I have the demo, right? I have a demo Excel. And if you guys want me to upload the demo Excel in this chat room, I'll do that for you as we go. The demo one shows, okay, here's where I met. This is a real client. I've sanitized it so you can't see their name or information. Here's where I met them, and look how messed up their line is, right? And I explained the blue line, the yellow line, the green line. And I said, and here's her exit interview, her green line 11 weeks later. And this is what's possible. And here's what happens with all my clients. Imagine what your life will be like when you're on the green line. So what have I just done there? What can you do in that moment? You've gone from describing a prestige tool. You've done the survey. You've shown them their graph. Then you've shown them the demo graph. And now you took them out into the future, past their reticular activating system, past their unconscious mind. And now they're imagining a future on that green line. Why would you do all of that? Plus, as you read them, the 56 statements, and here's a challenge to all of you as NLP coaches. Here's a challenge. When you read somebody 56 questions, and Laura, I apologize, I'm not 100% sure of your sensory acuity when you're online with clients, so you probably have a different way of getting sensory acuity about them. But reading 56 statements and hearing their tonality, their breathing, the response time, quick or slow, you probably get a good sense about when they're congruent or incongruent, whether they're deregulating or regulating. But for the rest of us who are using visual sensory acuity primarily, if you read 56 statements to a client and you haven't figured out their primary rep system, their lead rep system, and actually calibrated what a genuine yes looks like and a genuine no, and the confusion in between, you've got work to do. You need to up your game. I'll stay straight up. You get 56 statements, you read it, and as you read the last two words of the statement, you look at their face and you pick up the micro movements right away, the tonality, the breathing, the hesitation or the quickness. If you haven't calibrated them 9 ways to Sunday at the end of the ZTPI, get to work. That is a gift. So we have them in trance. We've calibrated them. We know their primary rep system. We know their lead rep system. We know their eye movements, right? Getting together with one's friends to socialize is one of life's important pleasures. And you watch their eyes. You watch their skin change color. You watch the speed. It only takes about 8 questions where you've actually got them nailed, right? Are they creating that answer, or is that a genuine unconscious response? Right? And now we're past the reticular activating system when we're done. Now we're going to bring them out of trance. We're going to show them their graph. We're going to show them the demo graph. And then we're going to go into the next exercise, which for us, if you're following PACE, is meta programs, right? If you've already got their eye movements down and you've already got their primary rep system, you don't have to ask questions. You've already done it. Now you're going to go to meta programs and they drop them back in trance. And so for all of us have done work before, now you're fractionating them. If you put a person in trance and pull them out of trance, and you put them back in a light trance, now you're fractionating them. And the faster we can, so by the time you're at strategy elicitation, having used the ZTPI as the big opener, the big opening scene, they're way more malleable. They're way more open to giving you the strategy easily and effortlessly. So by the time you get to question 3 of PACE, how long have you done it? They're a wide open book. And the doorway to that wide open book is the ZTPI. It's a ZTPI. So I really, really encourage you when you're doing ZTPI to look at it in a multi-layered holistic view. First, it differentiates us from others, those of us who use it. And it's heavily correlated. You know, those of you who know statistics, N values and P values and all that other stuff, massive correlation to other assessments. Massive, whatever the P value is of a massive correlation, it has it. And they're in the book, The Time Cure. I don't have my copy, Danielle has it, but The Time Cure, it shows them the Beck's anxiety and ZTPI for a client and Beck's depression and right in the back. I say Beck's all the time and then part of my brain says it's Graves, but I think it's Beck's depression scale. All right. And then you're getting the whole first page of PACE answered by doing those 56 questions. And you're getting in deep rapport with them. And you're bypassing their RAS. Right? And you've established yourself as credible because you're using a prestige tool. Right? You're using a prestige tool. And that sets a dynamic, that sets a context, that sets a tone for everything that comes thereafter. You know, don't do it at your peril. Yeah, I've probably done, I don't know how many breakthroughs now, 300-400, maybe more. And I've tried cheating the system so many ways. You know, I get lazy or just don't feel like doing the work on a day. Look at Kristen shaking her head. Really? You get lazy and try and cheat the system? Hell yeah. Right? We all do. Some days I just don't want to do another freaking 2-hour coaching session, and always costs me. What I don't do right in the opening minutes always costs you. Right? Always cost you. So that opening session, I always have their copy of the ZTPI open on my computer ready to go. I always have their PACE manual ready to go. I always have everything ready to go when they walk in. So I'm not flustered. I'm in the moment. I'm locked into my, I've got my Robert Downey Jr. Ironman coaching suit on and I'm ready to roll. And the ZTPI, is part of my Iron Man uniform. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. Cool. So the book, whoops. This book, it's a great read, you guys. It's a great read because he doesn't talk about the time perspective like I do, like we do, but like I do. He talks about it as a unifying theory from my perspective, because he talks about societies. A unifying theory is any theory that holds true at multiple chunk sizes. The individual, the small group dynamic, a large group dynamic, communities, countries, right? So he talks about it at a high level. Protestants, Catholics, people who live on the equator, people who live in northern climates, right? He talks about it at a global level. So he's Sicilian, and he makes some jokes. You guys have seen the RSA. He's Sicilian, and he said, well, there's in their verbs, there's a past tense, a present tense, there's no future tense. There's no future tense in Sicilian. And they're Catholic. And so they bring history into the present all the time, but they're not very future oriented Sicilians. And he jokes that's why nothing gets done. And they joke in Sicily that the Italians in the north are more they're not really they're not really Italians or Austrians, because they take a bag lunch to work and they're always on time and they're always worried about the future, right? And the northern dialects have a future tense of the verbs. So it's interesting, and it's interesting because when you hear him describe certain aspects, it really, in this book, it really dovetails into our understanding of NLP. And again, this is, one of the best psychologists of our time. And this is a quote from page 19 of the book. How you spend today, here, I'll get old quickly here for a moment. How you spend today ultimately determines both your past and your future. How you spend today determines both your past and your future. Interesting that how we live today actually taints, colors, influences our past, the recollection of it. And this correlates to Dr. Julia Shaw work on the memory illusion. Our memories aren't real, right? We recreate them all the time. We recreate them in this moment, in the now. When I read that line, that struck me. So how we live in this moment determines both your past and your future. Then when we do all that timeline therapy work, healing the phase from 0 to 7, going back on the Gestalt, doing the work for 0 to 7 is really powerful, because we're in the now, and what we do in the now determines both our past and our future. And again, so many therapists, so many NLP people just want to deal with the issue in the now, and they don't go back and heal that part from 0 to 7. And if you watch the movie Heal on Netflix, what you're going to find it when you do Heal on Netflix is they talk extensively about the phase 0 to 7. From 0 to 7. And again, the first person to talk about that phase was Aristotle. 2,000 years ago, Aristotle understood the impact of the phase 0 to 7. The Jesuits picked it up about 500 years ago, and started using that phase to influence their children that they're bringing into the church system. And in that movie, Heal, Bruce Lipton talks about it. And again, as a refresher, if you walk around, if you go to an NLP conference and say, okay, what frequency is a child's brain in from 0 to 2? And ask 20 people, 19 will tell you, I don't know. All right? And then ask them what frequency is their brain in from 2 to 7. And they'll say, I don't know. Well, I think it's important to know. That's why we're powerful at what we do. And from 8 to 14, it's a different frequency. And it's not until you're through puberty that we're in beta, right? And I think, I have no empirical evidence, but I don't think when you're in theta, you can have judgment. I don't think in theta you have judgment. You don't judge others or yourself as being good, bad, or indifferent. You don't hear children under the age of 7 be very judgmental unless they've learned to be judgmental. I'm bad, I'm good. They're not actually expressing a judgment that they created. They're expressing a belief. So when I hear a child under 7 say an I'm bad or I'm good or they're bad, I'm saying they're in theta frequency right now. They're probably not really judgmental. They're not judging the person compared to something else. They have now learned that. That's not okay, right? And then from 8 to 14, you're an alpha, and listen to Joe Dispenza talk about how hard it is to meditate and get into alpha, to slow down just to alpha, right? And there we got a bunch of 8 to 13-year-olds running around in alpha. And so the work we do using time perspective in the past is really, really important. And then through his research, right, they use these surveys that we use on 29 different countries. This has been tested cross-culturally. Doesn't matter the color of your skin. Doesn't really matter the language you administer it in. It's been translated, I forget into how many languages. So if you wanted to, if you guys are multilingual, I'm not, but if you're multilingual, I'm sure you can find a rendition in French or in Spanish for sure. And I don't know what other languages. On page 61 of the book, he talks about the 6 most common perspectives in the Western world. I love this. He calls it the past positive time perspective. And he calls it the past positive poly. Yeah, everything in my past was beautiful. I had a beautiful childhood. I had a beautiful this. I had a beautiful that. I had a beautiful past positive poly, right? Yeah. And for past poly, the past is half full, right? It's kind of an interesting thing. Past polys are rarely anxious, depressed, or aggressive. People who have a high orientation. So he went from talking about countries, now he's talking about archetypes. We work with ZTPI on individuals, and we take their individual curve and we alter it using NLP. He's talking about archetypes. Well, it's kind of cool to know archetypes, I think, right? So past positive poly. So if you have a depressed client, if you have somebody walk in and they say, I'm anxious, you know they're not a past positive poly, because past positive poly doesn't get anxious. She doesn't get depressed, right? Her friends describe her as warm, sentimental, friendly, happy, and confident. Most evenings, she has dinner with her family, and they eat around a large table. And for fun, she listens to oldies. The past positive time perspective captures attitudes towards the past, not an objective record of good or bad events. It captures a positive attitude around the past. Now, I'm not going to read everything in there, but I'm reading the part on the 6 archetypes. Now, we only deal with 5 archetypes in how we use ZTPI. The ZTPI is a 6th dimension called transcendental. But for our work in NLP, I chose only to use his survey that deals with the past, present, and future, not transcendental. So the past negative time perspective, he calls that past negative Ned. Ned is 40 years old. For Ned, the past is half empty. For past positive poly, it was half full. Ned is half empty. Ned hopes that his future 4 children can avoid the painful experience that he's endured. He does not have many close friends, and people describe him as unhappy, depressed, anxious, and shy. So a lot of our clients come in this way. Ned becomes so frustrated that he loses his temper and throws things. He seldom exercises or does anything fun, and he has poor impulse control. So like the past positive, the past negative time perspective assesses your attitude about events that occurred in the past. Negative attitudes may be due to actual experiences. Right? The present hedonistic time perspective. Hedonistic Headley. Hedonistic Headley. He's adventuresome, can make friends, has tons of energy, make anyone laugh. He always has a good time. He's after immediate gratitude, right? Freud referred to them as the pleasure principle. His motto is, if it feels good, do it, right? If it feels good, do it. With disregard for the future, who cares? We'll deal with tomorrow. Let's do it tonight. You know, if it were partying, let's party. I know this guy really well. I used to hang out with him. Headley's parents are divorced. Headley doesn't wear a wristwatch, and he wears new hot clothes when he has the money to buy them. He loves jazz, plays pickup basketball games, lives on fast food. He's never held a job for longer than 6 months, and he drives a fancy new sports car, and his credit cards are maxed. So when people come in with financial challenges, right, they're probably leaning towards the archetype Headley. I'm not going to say absolutely, but probably. If they've been known to be impulsive and irresponsible, they're probably Headley, right? And then we have the present hedonistic time perspective of fatalistic Fred. Now, fatalistic Fred, I love fatalistic Fred because all limiting beliefs come from fatalistic thought, and all fatalistic thought come from limiting beliefs. You cannot believe your life is fated unless you decided to do it, right? You didn't come out of the womb believing fate ruled your life. Unless you're of a faith that believes that. But for me, you know, I have six children. I do have 6 children, but I have 5 children alive, and my 5 children all came out of the womb, and none of them thought their life was fated. If any of them believe that their life is fated, it's because they've learned it. And you know that 3 of them live with Tara and I, so I try to imagine that our 3 kids believe their life is fated. I doubt it. Can't happen. But if you meet a child who believes it's just up to fate, I believe that they learned that, right? Fate is a learned behavior. So fatalistic Fred, since whatever will be, it doesn't really matter what I do. The absence of personal efficacy may be partially responsible for Fred's anxiety or depression. He cannot affect his outcome, so he gets depressed and anxious, because he cannot affect where it goes, right? His roommate describes him as a hard sell. Fred is unhappy, not conscientious, apathetic. He lacks Headley's pleasure seeking. And although Fred uses drugs and practices unsafe sex, it's not because they make him feel good, but because he doesn't believe that practicing safe sex or refraining from drug use will make any difference in the future, because it just doesn't matter. So you could have somebody who's doing wild things because they're into the pleasure. You could be doing things that seem irresponsible because they're fatalistic, right? It's an important distinction. And then the last of the 5 that we deal with is Future Felicia. I love his titles, Future Felicia. Felicia is governed by what Freud referred to as the reality principle. As part of her wants immediate gratification, just like Headley, but she carefully weighs the benefits of immediate gratification against future costs. Often she foregoes immediate gratification because she believes that she'll receive greater reward in the future. This is a lot of universal teachings, right? We pay a price today for more in the future. And he actually tracked what latitudes these kind of beliefs existed in. So towards the equator, we have more people who are hedonistic, and towards the north, we have people who are more futuristic. Catholicism is more past-orientated. Protestant religion is more future-orientated. It's kind of interesting. Now, these are broad generalizations, but this is based on hundreds of thousands of surveys globally in 29 different countries. Whoops. Felicia is extremely conscientious, consistent, concerned about future. At work, she meets all deadlines on top and top performer. She does like not novelty or excitement. She balances her checkbook, uses a day planner, makes to-do lists. She always wears a watch and reports having little free time. Mindful of her annual checkup, she flosses her teeth regularly, watches what she eats, because high blood pressure and irritable bowel syndrome, Felicia believes that risk-taking alcohol, drugs, and unsafe sex will just get in the way of her reaching her dreams, right? So the archetypes are kind of fun to read. And then every section, right, he has a complete chapter dedicated to it. So the past, how you see yesterday through the lens of today. And again, that's fascinating to me because my second older brother, who passed away a year ago, had a narrative. He had this beautiful narrative. He was stuck in the past. He never went to university. I would argue he was the smartest of the 6 kids, of my 5 siblings and I. Held 5 or 6, created 5 or 6 patents. But his story was always of being the unwanted son. Of 6 kids, all of us have family names. We're all named after an aunt or an uncle, family member. He's the only one who doesn't. He had a different name. He didn't have family names. And he always told everybody that clearly mom and dad didn't love him because he didn't get family names. Right? And he always had this narrative about he was the unloved one. And one day I had to have a conversation with him. And I said, well, Ron, just as if for a moment, where did you get your names from then? Where did mom and dad, did they go into a bin, into a name bin to pull names out of that? And he said, well, no. He said that my names come from dad's favorite actor and mom's favorite actor. Oh, so you actually got mom and dad's favorite names and the rest of us got hand-me-downs. Right? Oh. He said, yeah, dad, didn't love me. He didn't respect me. He didn't do this. He didn't do that. And I said, well, that's interesting, right? Because, to the best of my knowledge, dad never started a business with any of us except you. And you two started a business together that involved trucks, and the name on the side of the truck was Anro. My dad's name was Andy, so A-N, and my brother's name was Ron, R-O, Anro Services. And I said, correct me if I'm wrong, because I was only a baby, like you're 12 years older than me. When you and dad started this business, am I not correct? He sold his hunting rifle and his guitar that he played in the band with to start that business with you. Yeah, cool. So fast forward 10, 15 years, 20 years, my brother's now the biggest snowmobile dealer in the world, and he never told that story about being the unwanted son when he was the biggest in the world. So in that moment, his history changed, right? We see the past through our moment, through the present we're in. When he was on the top of the world, he never, ever told a story about being the unloved son. Just wasn't in his narrative. He was the biggest at what he did. He was the biggest snowmobile dealer in the world, and he owned a Harley Davidson dealership. Cool. And then when he sold those businesses in his 70s, he started slipping into dementia. The old narrative came back. He was at home. His health wasn't good. As soon as he sold his business, his health started going downhill. Why do I tell you that whole story? Because the past gets influenced by the present we're in. And so when you're dealing with clients, right, one of our goals is to recognize when we try and do timeline therapy, when you read Zimbardo's book, you understand that their past is really flavored by their present. And Dr. Kessler talks about that as well, that we're in that emotional moment. And Hebb's law in psychology speaks to it as well. That if we're firing the neurological pathways to negative emotions and we think about the past, we think about it negatively. And so my clients, I don't know about your clients, but my clients come in and the neurological pathways to the past, to the negative past, not the positive past, are hardwired. They get into past negative emotions in a nanosecond because of Hebb's law. They're attracting neurons. So if I combine Hebb's law with ZTPI, I now know, okay, I look at their ZTPI score and they've got high past negative. That tells me those neurological pathways have been wired and fired a lot. And now I look at how high or how low the past positive is. Now I've had clients with massive high past negative and perfectly normal past positive. So that tells me they can still wire and fire and wire the pathway to past positive, which is good, right? That's a win. That as a coach, when I see that alignment, I know I'm going to have an easier time getting to them to remember. So when I'm anchoring on the end of step 1, can you remember a time, a specific time you were happy? Absolutely, they'll be able to remember it. But if I have a client whose past negative is down at the bottom, so the past positive is down at the bottom, anchoring is going to be a bitch in that first session. Think about that. Hey, can you remember a specific time when you were totally happy? Nope. Can you remember a time when you were really, and now combine it with fatalism. Let's say they have high fatalism and low past positive. Do you remember a time when you were really confident? Fatalistic people aren't normally confident, okay? So if I have a high fatalism score, I'm not going to try and anchor confidence at the first session. Might as well bang my head on the wall. So that score, that overall score impacts the client, the person you're looking at. And we talk about getting in rapport with people, right? So we get in rapport physiologically, we match their postures. We get in rapport by going through their reticular activating system into their unconscious mind. We get into rapport. I do a lot of breathing with my clients. I get in rapport because we are matching physiology. Then we're matching, if I can get them to breathe into parasympathetic, now we're both in parasympathetic, cool. But that ZTPI, I now have a window into their being that I don't have anywhere else in NLP. And the ZTPI influences, gives me a window into what techniques will go easily and what techniques will go hard. And if I've got a person who's got massively high past negative and massively low past positive, what do you think the chance I'm going to use a negative emotions 2 on them to clear a negative emotion? 0. But if I've got medium high past negative and high past positive, I'll use negative emotions 2 to clear negative emotions, no problem. Because the chance of them having an abreaction is very low, right? Because remember, negative emotions 2, you get fully associated right out of the chute. But if somebody has massively high past negative and massively low past positive, I'm going to use negative emotions 1 until I've got them in a place where they can actually remember being happy. Does that make sense? So the ZTPI actually informs me on which techniques will be difficult, which techniques will be easy, which techniques I might want to stay the hell away from. And high fatalism, like I've got a young man right now, you guys will love this. Past negative way up there, past positive there, fatalism almost at the top of the page. That's how fated his life is. He's 23. How do you get that fated? I don't know. Hedonism, this is 23, unprotected sex, drug, and rock and roll. And then his future is almost off the page at the bottom. I've never seen a ZTPI like that. First time, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of clients, and all the ones you guys have shared with me, I've never, ever seen that before. Well, guess what, right? When I'm anchoring with him, I'm going to anchor some positive emotions that might have come out of his sex, drugs, and rock and roll life, like happiness, not from the activities, but things he can hook into easy. I'm not going to be able to find confidence for a while, probably not till I'm through step 3. But when I get through step 3, because I think anchoring in confidence is important, I'm going to go after it hard. Once I get his fatalism down, I'm going to start installing confidence, and I'm going to future pace his ability to do things because I know I have to counteract that high fatalism. Does that make sense? Everybody still with me, right? So that graph is powerful in terms of informing what I'll use, how I'll use it, and what reaction I might encounter, good, bad, or indifferent. And again, if you have somebody who has high past negative, low past positive, and high fatalism, their life's out of control, the chance of them having abnormal adverse reaction, sympathetic arousal, is very, very high. You can anticipate it. You can be ready. You're going to have to break state with them. Look up, see your telephone number, read it backwards. You don't have to get blindsided by it. The graph is right there in front of you. That tells, when I see that V, high negative, low positive, high fatalism, that V at the beginning, okay, get ready. This is a person who can abreact. They can go into very, very negative arousal. Right? Guess what? I don't joke with those people either. Some people would call me insensitive, but I don't think I am. But I joke with people, right? I don't joke with those people. Not in the first 2 sessions. All business, right? All business, keeping them calm, making good progress, right? If I was doing hypnotism, surrender, I was just talking to a person who does the Simpson methodology, which is they talk about the superconscious, and they do idiomotor skills, like ask your superconscious to give me a yes and a no. And I would be very cautious doing Simpson methodology with the person with that profile. Now, a person who has medium to high past negative and a reasonable past positive and a fairly low fatalism, I would easily engage them in deep hypnosis, including up to Esdale, putting them in an Esdale state, no problem. But I would be very cautious putting a person with that extraordinary V in an Esdale state. If I was doing hypnosis, right? I would be more cautious. I'd be aware of what the possibilities are in there. And then the future orientation, right? The future orientation, if you go review all the questions in the ZTPI for future orientation, you're going to notice that almost all of them are learned. Just go through and say, did the child come out of the womb with that belief? All the questions in the future. Right? Is that learned behavior, or is that did they come out of the womb? I'm going to suggest to you that it's mostly learned. And if it's learned and it's low, then new things can be learned instead. I'll share my screen here for a minute. We'll take a look at this. Oh boy. Yeah, so this is a real client screen. And so this high pass negative, low pass positive, and low fatalism, I'm quite comfortable doing negative emotions 1 on anger, negative emotions 2, if they respond really well and I don't see abreaction, I'd use negative emotions 2 sometimes just to do a change up without fear. But if her fatalism was high and that was even lower, I would stay away from negative emotions 2 for quite a while, right? Let's look at the questions for future. Can you still see my screen? Somebody give me a thumbs up. You can still see the questions. Thanks. So the future is right here. I believe that a person's day should be planned ahead. Did that person come out of the womb with that belief? Yes or no? They did not come out of the womb with the belief they had to plan ahead. So that's a learned behavior. If things don't get done on time, I don't worry about it. Did they come out of the womb worrying about getting things done on time? No, it's a learned behavior. So all the future, go through the questions. I make lists of things to do. Babies don't do that. I take each day as it is. Babies do that, but they don't do it rather than plan it. They just do it, right? I keep working at difficult, uninteresting tasks to help me get ahead. Now, that's a thing that a baby does intuitively. Like learning to walk, they get up, they fall down, they get up, they fall down. You know, eating food, they put food all over their face, they keep working on it. So that they come out of the womb with that one. Resisting temptation, nope, it's learned. Time to catch up on my work is learned. Being upset for appointments is learned. Meeting obligations is learned. Everything else is learned. The only thing that's not learned is keep working at difficult tasks. So when you're dealing with someone with a low future orientation, right? A low future orientation, you know that that's going to be all belief structure. So fatalism is all belief structure and future is all belief structure, right? all belief structure. I'd show you this one from my new client. Just take a look at it for myself for a second, see what his name is on it. Yeah, I can share this one. Really quickly. There you go. Yep, exactly, Simone. Wow. Exactly. Wow. All right. So we've got a gift in our hands called Zimbardo Time Perspective Inventory. It is from a prestige psychologist, doctor of psychology. And you can quote his other work. So go online, look at his other work. He's got a book that's quite famous called The Lucifer Effect, right? Book called The Lucifer Effect. Again, he's the former president of the American Psychological Association. And this test has been used in 29 countries. So it doesn't matter culture or language. It's been corroborated by other studies in Europe and North America. It corroborates with other psychological assessment tools, profiling tools. It gives you a way into seeing your client in the first 15 minutes that I don't know anything else in NLP exists like it. When you read those 56 statements and calibrate on your client, you learn so much about them. So much about them. And then the actual graph informs the tools you use. Which tools will work well, which tools might be challenging, which tools you might want to stay away from for a while, right? And it informs you about where you need to do the work. So with that young man with that low future, I know when I get to the middle of step 3, where I'm looking at limiting decisions, I will already have cleared the past. But these are decisions about the future. And he's made them in the past. He's decided that, but he's got behavioral patterns that he decided to do. They just doesn't give a damn about the future. He is Fred, I think, right? He's Fred. And so we're really blessed to have that tool, I think. And if we're fortunate enough, Dr. Zimbardo and Dr. Sword are looking at and are working in the prison system using Zimbardo Time Perspective Inventory to assess people in the penal system. And what struck Rosemary when I was talking to her was, as again I said, that she had never seen transformation measured, transformation created and measured the way we're doing it. The data we're getting it, I'm getting it, you're getting it. Right? They'd never seen that before. So when you think about the past and the future now, what is it that you're going to do? Right? How is it that you're going to approach what you do with Zimbardo Time Perspective Inventory? Right? What are you going to do? So let's open the